The pen was in my hand, the decree was on the desk, and somewhere outside my window, the city of Riyadh was sleeping, completely unaware that I was about to sign an order that would strip thousands of people of the only comfort they had ever known. Then he walked in, and I dropped the pen. If you want to know who walked into that room and what he said to me that night, make sure you subscribe, because this story is one I have never been able to tell without my hands shaking. I was 7 years old the first time I understood what power looked like, not the kind you read about in books. Not the kind they describe in speeches, the kind you feel in your chest, low and heavy, like a stone pressing against your ribs from the inside. My father had called me into his private study late one afternoon. The room smelled the way it always did, like old leather and oud incense burning somewhere just out of sight. He was seated behind his desk, and two men in dark suits were standing near the far wall, not speaking, barely breathing. My father looked at me for a long time without saying anything. Then he slid a folder across the desk. "Open it," he said. Inside were photographs, a school, a village somewhere in the southern region, near the Yemen border, children sitting on dirt floors. I remember one image specifically, a boy about my age, holding a book to his chest, with both arms wrapped around it like it was something precious. "Do you know what he is holding?" my father asked. I looked closer. I could not read the cover clearly in the photograph, but I shook my head. "A Bible," he said. The word came out of his mouth the same way he said words like contamination or infiltration, flat, final. Someone brought it across the border. Someone thought it belonged in the hands of our children. He closed the folder. "A prince of this house," he said, "does not allow what does not belong." I did not fully understand what he meant that day, but I understood the tone, and I understood that the boy in the photograph, with his arms wrapped around that book, was doing something my father considered dangerous. What I did not understand and would not understand for many years was why. That question, the one I was too young to ask and too afraid to hold on to, is the question that eventually broke everything open. I grew up in a world that was ordered, precise. Every hour had its place. I would wake before Fajr, the call to prayer pulling me out of sleep before the sun had any idea it was time to rise. I would wash my hands and face in the dark, the water always colder than expected, and I would pray on the small rug beside my bed, the same one my grandfather had given me when I was 4 years old. It had a geometric pattern in deep blue and red, and one corner had a small unraveling thread I used to wrap around my finger while I prayed. I did not think of this as ritual, it was just the shape of the morning. Then breakfast, then tutors, then more study, then afternoons with the men who shaped me, military advisors, religious scholars, political strategists. I was the youngest son in a large family, which meant I had something to prove that my older brothers did not. They had been born into their positions. I had to earn mine. My father made that clear without ever saying it directly. He said it with glances, with the way he turned his attention toward my brother Khalid when a question was asked and I was standing right there, with the way he would say, after a long silence, "You are still young, Zaid." I carried that sentence with me everywhere. Still young, not yet ready, not yet enough. It became the engine of almost everything I did. By the time I was 26, I had become one of the most disciplined members of the royal household. Not the most powerful, not the most visible, but the most reliable. If something needed to be done cleanly, without noise, without scandal, without the kind of public mess that embarrassed the family, they called me. That is how I ended up overseeing the Cultural Compliance Division. That is a careful name for something that was not careful at all. My job, in plain language, was to make sure that materials considered threatening to our national identity and religious order were removed from circulation. Books, pamphlets, certain imported media, and yes, Bibles. I want to be honest with you here, because this story does not mean anything if I am not. I did not think of it as persecution. I genuinely did not. In my mind, I was protecting something. Our faith, our culture, our people. The foreign workers who came into Saudi Arabia knew the laws before they arrived. They knew what they could bring and what they could not. If they chose to bring Bibles anyway, that was a violation. And violations had consequences. That was the world I lived in, and I believed in it. I need you to understand that part clearly. I was not a villain in my own story. I was a prince who believed he was doing the right thing, and that is sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can be. The first major confiscation I personally supervised was in the spring. I remember because the jacaranda trees near the eastern wing of the compound had just started blooming, dropping these small purple flowers on the stone walkways, and one of the grounds workers was sweeping them up as I walked to the convoy. We were heading to a labor camp on the edge of the city. Filipino workers mostly, construction, some domestic staff. Intelligence had flagged the camp after someone reported seeing a group gathering on Sunday evenings in one of the common rooms. We arrived before 6 in the morning. The workers were already awake. They work long hours in Saudi Arabia. They do not have the luxury of sleeping in. My team moved through the dormitory building systematically. I stood near the entrance of one building and watched as my officers went door to door, room to room. Most of the men handed things over without resistance. Some looked at the floor. A few looked at me directly, and I held their gaze, because I had been taught that looking away signaled weakness. One man, older, maybe 60, with calloused hands and reading glasses hanging from his shirt pocket, did not hand over his Bible right away. He held it to his chest the same way that boy in the photograph had, all those years ago in my father's study. My officer reached for it. The man let go. He did not cry. He did not argue. He just let it go, and then looked at his hands like he was trying to remember what they felt like, empty. I told myself that was not my problem. I was still young enough to believe that. We loaded the confiscated materials into crates, dozens of them by the end of the morning. Most were standard issue Bibles, the kind that missionaries send in bulk, inexpensive covers. Small print, but one of my officers pulled me aside near the end and handed me something different. "This one is unusual, sir," he said. It was a Bible unlike the others. The cover was dark navy blue, soft from years of handling. The spine was cracked in 3 places. The edges of the pages had turned amber with age. Someone had wrapped a piece of cloth around it, tied with a thin cord, like a gift someone once gave with great care. I almost had it placed in the crate with the rest, but something made me untie the cord. Maybe it was the weight of the thing. It felt heavier than it should have for a book its size, or maybe it was something I cannot explain. A pull, a curiosity, something quiet and insistent that I had no category for. I opened it. The first thing I saw was not text. It was handwriting. Not just a name scrawled inside the front cover. Pages of it, dozens of pages at the front and back, filling the margins, tucked onto blank end papers, written in multiple languages. I could read the Arabic portions. Some was in what looked like Tagalog, some in English. I stood there by the convoy and I started reading. They were prayers, handwritten prayers dating back decades, written by what I began to understand were multiple owners of the same Bible, passed from person to person across years. And then I stopped breathing, because I found my name, not my name specifically, not Zaid. But the prayers were for the royal family, for the Saudi leadership, for the princes and the king, and the people who governed the land where these workers lived. One prayer, written in careful English, in what looked like a woman's handwriting, said something I will never forget as long as I live. It asked Jesus to bless the Saudi royal family, to protect them, to soften their hearts, to give them wisdom and peace. It was dated 14 years earlier. These people had been praying for us, the people whose books we were taking, the people who handed over their Bibles with empty hands and quiet eyes. They had been asking their God to bless us. I stood there beside that convoy for a long moment. Then I put the Bible under my arm and walked to my car. Nobody questioned me. I was a prince. You do not question a prince about what he carries. I did not tell anyone about the Bible. I placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk at home, under a stack of administrative files. I told myself I was keeping it as evidence, as documentation, as something I might need later for official purposes. That was a lie I told myself for about 3 days. On the 4th night I could not sleep. Riyadh was quiet. My household was asleep. I went to my desk and I opened the drawer and I took out the Bible and I sat with it under the lamp for a long time before I opened it. I started with the prayers again. I read through all of them slowly. Some were desperate, written in moments of fear, asking for safety for children back home in the Philippines or in Indonesia or in India. Some were full of gratitude, thanking God for small things, a day without illness, enough money to send home that month, a kind word from a supervisor. And woven through all of it, consistently, across every language and every decade, were prayers for the people who ruled over them, for us. I cannot explain to you what it feels like to read the prayers of someone you have wronged, not just inconvenienced, wronged. and to discover that instead of cursing you, they were lifting you up. It does something to the architecture of your certainty. It does not collapse it all at once. It just loosens something, one bolt, one beam, and everything shifts just slightly, enough that you notice the ground is not as solid as you thought. I started reading the Gospels that same night. I need to tell you something honest about what that was like. I did not come to the Gospels as a skeptic looking to be convinced. I did not come as a seeker full of longing. I came as someone who was confused. And maybe, underneath the confusion, a little ashamed, though I would not have used that word then. I read the way I had been trained to evaluate things, critically, analytically, looking for inconsistencies, for propaganda, for the manipulation I had been told was buried in these pages. What I found instead was a man who kept doing the opposite of what power does. Power takes. He gave. Power protects itself. He walked toward the thing that would destroy him. Power surrounds itself with the important people. He sat down with the ones nobody wanted. I read the story of the woman caught in a crowd of people ready to stone her. I read about a tax collector up in a tree trying to get a look at something he was not sure he believed in. I read about a man who had been sick for 38 years, just lying beside a pool waiting for something to change. And Jesus walked up to him and asked a question that stopped me completely. He asked, "Do you want to be healed?" I sat back from that page, because it sounds like an obvious question. Of course the man wanted to be healed. He had been there for 38 years. But Jesus asked it anyway, and I began to think it was not obvious at all. Some people get comfortable in their suffering. Some people build an identity around the walls they live inside. Some people are so used to waiting that they have forgotten what they were waiting for. I thought about my father's study, the folder, the photograph, the boy with his arms around a book. I thought about the man with the reading glasses and the empty hands. I thought about the woman who wrote that prayer 14 years ago, asking Jesus to bless people like me. Do you want to be healed? I closed the Bible and sat in the dark for a very long time. The next several months were the strangest of my life. I was still functioning, still attending meetings, still signing off on reports, still sitting across from my brothers at long tables and discussing policy and security and the image of the kingdom. I was still, by every visible measure, exactly who I had always been. But inside, something had cracked open. I found myself watching people differently. The workers in the corridor of our administrative building, the women who cleaned the offices, the drivers who waited outside in the heat. I had looked past them for years without seeing them, not out of cruelty, simply out of habit, the way you stop seeing a piece of furniture once it becomes part of the room. Now I saw them, and seeing them was uncomfortable in a way I had not expected, not because they were suffering in visible, dramatic ways, but because they were whole. They had whole lives, whole hearts, whole histories I knew nothing about. They were not background, they were people. And somehow, through all my education and all my training, I had learned to treat a category of human beings as scenery. That realization did not feel good. It felt like swallowing something rough. I kept reading. I was careful. I read late at night, with the door locked, the Bible wrapped back in its cloth cover inside my desk drawer during the day. I was not ready to call what I was doing a search. I was not ready to call it anything, but I kept returning to it the way you return to a conversation that you know is not finished. One evening I read the passage where Jesus says that whatever you do to the least of these, you do to him. I thought about the crates. The dozens of crates we had loaded that morning in the spring. The books that had been wrapped and saved and carried across oceans by people who had almost nothing, and how we had taken them with gloved hands and numbered them like inventory. I went to the bathroom and turned on the water so no one would hear me. And I sat on the floor and I pressed my back against the cabinet, and I did something I had not done since I was a child. I wept. Not a polished kind of crying, not quiet tears, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere you forgot existed, low and wrenching, like something tearing loose that had been stuck for a very long time. I did not pray. I did not know how to pray to this Jesus I had been reading about. I just sat there on the bathroom floor of my palace and felt the full weight of who I had been. The summons from my father came in the fall. I was called to a private meeting with him and two of my older brothers. The kind of meeting that was never on the official schedule. The kind where the tea was poured and then the staff was asked to leave and the door was closed. My father sat at the head of the table. He looked older than the last time I had really looked at him. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His hands, resting on the table, had the careful stillness of someone conserving energy. "There is a proposal," he said, "for a comprehensive sweep, nationwide." He slid a document toward me. I looked at it. A coordinated operation across all 14 provinces, every labor camp, every foreign worker housing complex, every port of entry. The scale of it was staggering. "We have intelligence," my brother Khalid said, suggesting that distribution networks have been operating more aggressively than previously understood. The volume of materials entering the country has increased significantly in the last 2 years. I kept my face still. "I was good at that. We want you to lead it," my father said. "You have the experience. You have the relationships in the division. And frankly," he glanced at Khalid and then back at me, "you have the most to gain from demonstrating your readiness." There it was. "Still young, Zaid. But here is your chance." I looked at the document. I looked at the scale of what they were describing. Tens of thousands of Bibles, hundreds of thousands of people, the prayer books and the devotional materials, and the small creased photographs of saints that women carried in their pockets. All of it. And somewhere in all of that there were prayers for us. "I need a few days to review the operational logistics," I said. My father studied me for a moment. "Of course," he said, "but we move by the end of the month." I nodded. I took the document home. I did not sleep well that night, or the next, or the next. I kept returning to the Bible in my desk, opening it to pages at random, the way you shake a jar, hoping something will settle into a clear picture. I read the Sermon on the Mount. I read the parable of the lost sheep, the shepherd leaving the 99 to go find the one that wandered. I read the story of Peter denying Jesus 3 times, and then the moment after the resurrection when Jesus did not condemn him, did not remind him of the betrayal, just asked him simply, quietly, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" 3 times, the same number of denials. Not punishment, not a test of loyalty in the way my family measured loyalty, just an invitation, "Come back, come back, come back." I could not square this with anything I knew about power. In the world I came from, betrayal had consequences. Weakness had consequences. Disloyalty was the thing that ended careers, ended relationships, sometimes ended more than that. The economy of power I had grown up in was built entirely on what you had demonstrated and what you owed. This was different. This was something I did not have a word for in the language of my upbringing. Grace. I had read the word in the Gospels, but I had read it like a historical term, like a concept that applied to another time and another people. That week, for the first time, I felt it pressing against the inside of my chest, like it wanted to belong to me too. On the 5th night after the meeting, I sat at my desk with the decree in front of me. The signature line was there at the bottom, waiting. I had a pen in my hand. The house was completely quiet, and then it was not. I do not know how else to tell this part except exactly as it happened, and I know how it sounds, and I am asking you to stay with me. The light in the room changed. Not dramatically, not a blinding flash, just a shift, the way a room feels different when a cloud moves away from the sun, that subtle warming of the air, the slight brightening of surfaces. But it was late at night. There was no sun. I looked up from the desk. He was standing beside it. I did not see a vision. I did not see a dream. I was awake. I was fully, completely awake. I had been staring at that document for 3 hours, and my eyes were tired and my mind was sharp, and I know the difference between waking and sleeping, and between imagination and presence. He was there. I cannot describe him in the way you might expect me to. I cannot give you a catalogue of his appearance. What I can tell you is the feeling. The feeling was like standing at the edge of something enormous, not frightening, not threatening, but vast in a way that made everything else in the room feel suddenly very small and very temporary. He looked at me, and he said, in a voice that was quieter than I expected, and more certain than anything I had ever heard, "Those who prayed for you knew me before you ever searched for me." That was all. 7 words. 6, if you count differently. Enough to take the pen out of my hand. I set it down on the desk. The room was just a room again. The light was just the lamp. The decree was still on the desk with the signature line empty, and I was different. Not in a way I could have explained to anyone in that household, not in a way I could have announced or demonstrated or proven, but in the way that the man beside the pool must have felt when his 38 years of waiting suddenly had an answer. I was different all the way down. I sat at the desk until the call to Fajr prayer drifted through the city. I did not sign the decree. I sat with my hands flat on the desk and I listened to that call, the same call I had heard every morning of my life, and this time I heard it differently. Not as a structure, not as a schedule, but as a voice reaching towards something it believed was listening, something I was beginning to believe was listening too. I folded the decree and placed it in the drawer beneath the Bible. Then I went to pray, the old way, the way I had always known. But this time I said something at the end, quiet, barely above a breath, not in any formal structure, just a man sitting on a rug with an unraveling corner, talking to a God he was only beginning to understand was bigger than the box he had built for him. I said, I do not know how to do this, but I think you know I am here. That was my first prayer to Jesus. It was not eloquent, it was not theological, it was just true. The fallout came slowly, then all at once. I told my father I needed more time on the operational review. He accepted that the first time. The second time, he looked at me with something new in his eyes, something I recognized as the beginning of suspicion. Khalid called me privately. We sat in his car in the underground garage below the ministry building, because that was the place where we could speak without being heard or documented. There are people asking questions about your commitment, he said. He was not threatening me. He was warning me, in the way that older brothers sometimes do, with just enough distance to protect themselves. What kind of questions, I asked. The kind that start with why, and end with loyalty, he said. I nodded slowly. I need you to understand something, I told him. I have been looking at the logistics of this operation, and there are elements that concern me. The scale, the liability, the international optics. He studied my face. That is not what this is about, Zaid. I looked back at him. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Then what happened to you? And I almost told him. I got so close to telling him that I could feel the words forming, this strange and impossible story about a Bible in a desk drawer, and a woman's prayer from 14 years ago, and a presence in a room at midnight. I got right to the edge of saying it. But I was not ready, and Khalid was not ready, and the underground garage of a government building was not the place. I am still working through it, I said. He did not look satisfied, but he let me out of the car. The decree was reassigned to another member of the family 3 weeks later. I lost something when that happened. I want to be honest about that too. I lost standing. I lost the particular shine of being my father's most reliable instrument. There were dinners where the conversation did not include me the way it once had. There were meetings I was no longer invited to. And I want to tell you that it did not hurt, but it did. I had spent my entire life trying to earn enough, trying to prove that the youngest son was not just still young but actually worthy. And just as I had been offered the clearest path toward that proof, I had stepped off it. Not dramatically, not publicly. I had not staged a protest or written a manifesto or confessed to anyone. I had just quietly, in the privacy of my own soul, decided that I could not do it. And the cost of that decision was real. But here is the strange thing. The pain of losing standing was not the same kind of pain as the pain I had felt on the bathroom floor that night. One kind of pain comes from losing something you were clutching. The other kind comes from finally letting go of something that had been clutching you. The second kind, even when it hurts, feels like the beginning of breathing. Over the following year, I began to use what influence I still had differently. I had connections in the charitable sector, in international development circles, in the kind of quiet diplomacy that happens outside of official channels. I began to redirect resources, small at first, cautiously. I channeled funding into a clean water initiative in the southern provinces, the same southern region where I had seen that photograph in my father's study 20 years earlier. I worked with a non-governmental organization to establish a mobile medical clinic network serving migrant worker communities. I was careful. I moved the way water moves around stone, not through it, not over it, but finding the way that meets the least resistance and keeps moving forward anyway. And then I did something that took longer to decide than almost anything else in my life. I found a way to ensure that access to scripture, not imposed, not distributed through any official religious structure, just quietly available, was possible for the communities I was now working in. Tucked into literacy programs, woven into educational materials, available to anyone who wanted it without cost or condition. I thought of the woman who had written that prayer 14 years ago. She had asked Jesus to bless the Saudi royal family. I wanted her to know, wherever she was, that something had changed. I have never made a public declaration of faith. I want to explain why, because I know that might be confusing. In some traditions, the testimony is the point. The public moment is the turning point. The announcement is the confirmation. But in my world, a public declaration of faith in Jesus Christ is not just a personal statement, it is a political event. It has consequences not just for me but for the people I love, for the work I am trying to do, for the communities I am now trying to serve. A public declaration would almost certainly end my ability to do anything from inside the structures I still move within. So my testimony is not a speech. It is a school in the eastern province that now has a real library. It is a water pump in a village near the Yemeni border where children used to walk 2 miles for clean water. It is a medical tent that shows up every other Thursday in a migrant worker camp, staffed by doctors who actually look at the people they are treating. It is the stack of Gospels that sits in the back corner of a community center in the south, available to anyone, no questions asked. I think of the workers I stood over that spring morning, the man with the reading glasses and the empty hands. I cannot return what we took from him. I cannot undo that morning, but I can build something on the other side of it that means the next person who comes with almost nothing and a book they carried across an ocean will find something waiting for them instead of someone taking. Jesus asked a man who had been waiting 38 years if he wanted to be healed. The answer was yes. The answer has always been yes. It just took me a long time to realize I was also the man beside the pool. There is one more thing I want to tell you. A few months after I had started the charitable work, I received a letter. It came through one of the NGO contacts, forwarded several times, from someone who had no idea who I was, just that I was connected to the work. It was from a woman in the Philippines, older. She wrote that she had worked in Saudi Arabia for many years and that she had left behind many things when she returned home, including a Bible that meant a great deal to her, a navy blue Bible with prayers written inside it, that had been taken from her camp years ago. She said she did not write to ask for it back. She knew that was impossible. She wrote to say that she had heard about the Clean Water Project and the medical clinics, and that someone had told her the work was coming from inside the royal household. She did not know who specifically. She said she wanted whoever it was to know that she had prayed for the Saudi royal family for more than 20 years. She said she hoped God had heard. I held that letter for a long time. Then I opened my desk drawer, and I took out the navy blue Bible, and I held them both, the letter in one hand and the Bible in the other, and I understood something I do not have clean words for. Not the kind you can build an argument from or post on a wall or cite in a document. Just this. The prayers of ordinary people can reach the most fortified places on earth. Just this. The things they called foreign and threatening and dangerous were, in the end, the things that healed me. Just this. Jesus did not wait for me to be ready to find him. He was in that drawer, in that woman's handwriting, in those 14-year-old prayers, waiting for the morning I would finally untie the cord. I still wake before Fajr. The call still comes across the city, the way it always has, long and low and certain. I still wash my hands in the dark. I still feel the cold water. I still carry the memory of that blue geometric rug with the unraveling corner. But now, after the call fades, I sit for a while longer, and I talk to the one I spent half my life taking things from, and he is, somehow, not done with me yet. If this story did something to you today, if it reminded you that no heart is too far gone, no history too complicated, no past too heavy for grace to reach, then hold on to that. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because the stories we share here are the kind that stay with you. There are 2 videos right there on your screen right now. Both of them carry the same kind of weight this one did. Real stories about faith cracking open in places no one expected. I think you are going to want to see them. We will see you in the next one.